Chapter 1. The arrival. The barren landscape of Mars stretched out endlessly beneath the ship, a desolate sea of red dust and rocky outcroppings bathed in the light of a distant sun. The eclipse cut through the thin atmosphere with a low hum, its sleek hull casting a long shadow over the Martian surface. But this was not the Mars that humanity had come to know. This was a Mars of the future, a Mars transformed by the hands of alien invaders. As the ship descended, Captain Serena Ward watched the terrain pass beneath them with a sense of foreboding. They were approaching the site of the latest anomaly, a disturbance in the Martian landscape that had sent shockwaves through the scientific community. But it was more than just a geological oddity. It was something much darker. "Captain, we're nearing the coordinates," Commander Lee's voice crackled over the intercom. Ward nodded, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the view screen. The anomaly was still out of sight, hidden by the rugged terrain, but she could feel its presence, an oppressive weight that seemed to press down on her from all sides. "Take us in, Commander," she ordered. The eclipse banked to the left, descending further as it followed the contours of the Martian landscape. The red dust swirled in its wake, obscuring the ground below. But as they approached the anomaly, the dust began to clear, revealing a sight that made Ward's blood run cold. There, nestled between two towering cliffs, was a massive alien structure, an immense starship, its hull shaped like a colossal skull. The ship's surface was pitted and scarred, as if it had endured countless battles, and its eyes glowed with an eerie blue light that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. "My God," Ward whispered, her voice barely audible. The eclipse hovered above the alien ship, its sensors scanning the structure for any signs of life. But the readings were confusing. There were no life forms detected, yet the ship was clearly active. The blue lights that dotted its surface flickered and pulsed, as if the ship itself was alive, a sentient being rather than a mere machine. "Captain, I'm picking up some strange energy readings," Jax reported from the engineering station. "It's like nothing I've ever seen before. The energy signature is off the charts, but it's not coming from any known source. It's almost as if the ship is generating it from within." Ward frowned, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of the situation. The skull-shaped ship was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, a relic from a time and place far beyond their understanding. But one thing was clear: it was dangerous. The very air around it seemed to vibrate with a malevolent energy, a force that threatened to consume them if they ventured too close. "Keep us at a safe distance," Ward ordered. "I don't want to take any chances." As the eclipse held its position above the alien ship, Ward studied the structure with a mixture of awe and dread. It was a marvel of engineering, a testament to the technological prowess of its creators. But it was also a harbinger of death, a weapon designed to bring destruction on a scale that humanity could scarcely comprehend. "Captain, we're detecting movement," Lee said, her voice tensed as Ward's eyes snapped to the view screen, where she saw a series of smaller ships detaching from the main vessel. The skull-shaped ship was releasing its minions, a fleet of sleek, deadly-looking craft that fanned out in all directions, as if searching for something or someone. "They've spotted us," Ward said, her voice grim. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. We need to get out of here before they lock onto our position." But even as she spoke, the smaller ships began to converge on the eclipse, their weapons systems coming online. They were faster and more agile than anything in the human fleet, and they moved with a precision that was almost terrifying. "Incoming fire!" Jack shouted. The eclipse lurched to the side as a volley of plasma bolts streaked past, narrowly missing the ship's hull. Ward gripped the arms of her chair, her mind racing as she barked orders to her crew. "Engage the defensive systems. Return fire." The eclipse's guns roared to life, unleashing a barrage of energy blasts that streaked through the Martian sky. But the alien ships were relentless, dodging and weaving as they closed in on the human vessel. "Captain, we can't hold them off," Lee shouted, her voice filled with desperation. Ward's heart pounded in her chest as the alien ships swarmed around them, their weapons blazing. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. And all the while, The skull-shaped ship loomed above them, its blue eyes glowing with a cold, malevolent light. "We have to retreat," Ward ordered. "Get us out of here now." But as the eclipse began to pull away, a blinding beam of light shot from the skull ship, striking the human vessel with a force that sent it spinning out of control. The ship shuddered violently, its systems overloaded by the sheer power of the blast. "Captain, we've lost control," Jack shouted, his voice filled with panic. Ward gritted her teeth, struggling to stay conscious as the ship spun wildly through the Martian sky. The view screen flickered and went dark, and the air was filled with the sound of alarms and the frantic voices of her crew. And then, with a deafening crash, the Eclipse slammed into the ground, its hull crumpling as it skidded across the rocky terrain. The force of the impact threw Ward from her chair, and she hit the floor hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. For a moment, there was only darkness, an all-consuming void that threatened to swallow her whole. But slowly, painfully, Ward forced herself to her feet, her vision swimming as she tried to assess the damage. The bridge was a wreck, consoles sparking and smoking as the ship's system struggled to come back online. The crew was dazed, some of them injured, but miraculously, no one was dead. "Status report," Ward croaked, her voice hoarse. Lee was the first to respond, her face pale but determined. "We've lost power to most of the systems, but life support is still operational. The hull is breached in several places, but it's holding for now." Ward nodded, her mind racing as she tried to come up with a plan. They were stranded, their ship crippled, and the alien fleet was still out there, waiting to finish them off. But even as the situation seemed hopeless, Ward felt a spark of determination ignite within her. They had faced impossible odds before, and they had survived. They would survive this too. "Prepare the emergency beacon," she ordered. "We need to send a distress signal to Earth. If we're going down, we're not going down alone." As the crew scrambled to carry out her orders, Ward turned her gaze to the view screen, which had flickered back to life. The skull-shaped ship still hovered above them, its blue eyes blazing with an eerie light. But there was something else now, something moving within the ship, a dark shadow that seemed to pulse with life. And then she saw it, a massive figure, humanoid in shape but twisted and deformed, as if it had been fused with the very metal of the ship itself. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, its eyes glowing with the same blue light that illuminated the ship's hull. "Captain, what is that?" Jax whispered, his voice trembling. Ward didn't have an answer. She could only watch in horror as the figure stepped forward, its massive hands reaching out toward the Eclipse. It was as if the ship itself was alive, a living weapon that had been awakened by their presence. And now, it was coming for them. Chapter 2. The Awakening. The ground trembled as the colossal figure approached the downed Eclipse, its every step sending shockwaves through the Martian soil. Captain Serena Ward could only stare in stunned silence, her mind struggling to comprehend the sheer scale of the creature before them. It was like nothing she had ever seen, an amalgamation of metal and flesh, with glowing blue eyes that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of reality. "Captain, we have to do something." Lee's voice was frantic, her hands trembling as she clutched the controls. Ward snapped out of her daze, her instincts taking over. "Get those weapons online. I don't care how, just do it." Jax and the rest of the engineering team worked frantically to restore power to the ship's weapon systems, but it was a losing battle. The Eclipse had taken too much damage in the crash, and its once formidable arsenal was now little more than a collection of smoking ruins. "We're not going to make it," Jax muttered under his breath, his voice filled with despair. Ward refused to accept that. They had come too far, fought too hard, to give up now. "Focus, Jax. We've faced worse odds before. We can find a way out of this." But even as she spoke, the massive figure reached the ship, its towering form casting a long shadow over the Eclipse. The ground shook as it knelt down, its enormous hands closing around the hull with a grip that could crush steel like paper. The ship groaned under the strain, metal buckling as the creature began to lift it from the ground. The crew was thrown off their feet, the bridge tilting at a dangerous angle as the ship was hoisted into the air. "Captain, we're being lifted," Lee shouted, her voice laced with panic. Ward struggled to stay upright, her mind racing as she tried to come up with a plan. They were powerless against this thing. Whatever it was, their only hope was to find a way to escape before it crushed them like insects. "Jax, can we overload the engines? Create a distraction, something to make it drop us," she asked, her voice tight with urgency. Jax hesitated, his eyes wide with fear. "We could try, but there's a good chance it'll blow us to pieces." "It's better than being crushed," Ward shot back. "Do it." Jax didn't need to be told twice. He and his team set to work, frantically rerouting power to the engines in a desperate bid to overload them. The ship's systems groaned in protest, warning lights flashing as the temperature in the engine room began to climb. "Engines at critical," Jack shouted. "Get ready." Ward braced herself, holding onto the nearest console as the ship began to vibrate, the engines whining as they were pushed beyond their limits. The creature's grip tightened, its massive hands squeezing the hull with relentless force. "Now, Jax," Ward ordered. With a deafening roar, the engines exploded, sending a shockwave through the ship that knocked everyone off their feet. The Eclipse lurched violently, the creature's grip faltering as the force of the explosion sent it staggering backward. For a moment, it seemed as if they might have a chance. The ship slipped from the creature's grasp, plummeting back toward the ground. But before they could even begin to celebrate, the creature recovered, its eyes blazing with fury. "Brace for impact," Ward shouted. The Eclipse slammed into the ground with bone-jarring force, the hull crumpling under the weight of the impact. The crew was thrown about like rag dolls, their cries of pain and fear filling the air. But the creature was not finished with them. With a deafening roar, it lunged forward, its massive hands closing around the ship once more. This time, there would be no escape. "Captain, we're not going to make it," Lee screamed, her voice filled with terror. Ward felt a wave of despair wash over her. They had fought so hard, but it was all for nothing. The creature was too powerful, too relentless. There was no way out. But then, as if in response to their desperation, a new sound filled the air, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. The creature froze, its glowing eyes widening in what could only be described as fear. "Well, what is that?" Jax whispered, his voice trembling. Ward didn't have an answer. She could only watch in stunned disbelief as the ground beneath the creature began to crack and shift, the red dust swirling into the air as something massive began to rise from the earth. That IT was another ship, an alien vessel, even larger than the skull-shaped behemoth that had attacked them. Its surface was sleek and black, with glowing red lines that pulsed like veins beneath its skin. The ship's design was unlike anything Ward had ever seen, a nightmarish fusion of organic and mechanical elements that seemed to defy the laws of nature. As the new ship rose from the ground, the creature released its grip on the Eclipse, backing away with a low, guttural hiss. It was afraid of whatever force had just emerged from the Martian soil. Ward watched in awe as the new ship fully emerged, its massive form hovering above the ground with a grace that belied its size. The air around it crackled with energy, and Ward could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. "Captain, this is incredible," Lee whispered, her voice filled with wonder. But Ward couldn't shake the feeling that they were still in grave danger. The new ship might have scared off the creature, but that didn't mean it was on their side. For all they knew, it could be an even greater threat. "We need to get out of here," Ward said, her voice firm. "Jax, can you get the engines back online?" Jax hesitated, his eyes glued to the view screen. I don't know, Captain. The engines took a lot of damage in that explosion. We might not have enough power to get off the ground." Ward clenched her fists, her mind racing as she tried to think of a solution. They couldn't stay here, not with that massive ship looming over them. But without the engines, they were sitting ducks as she weighed their options. The view screen flickered, and a new image appeared, a close-up of the alien ship. But it wasn't just the ship that caught her attention. It was the figure standing on its surface. That IT was humanoid, with a tall, muscular frame, and skin that glowed with an otherworldly red light. Its eyes were dark and hollow, and it wore a suit of armor that seemed to be fused with its body. The figure raised one hand, and the ship responded, its engines roaring to life as it began to move. That Ward's heart skipped a beat as she realized what was happening. The alien ship was coming for them. "All hands, prepare for evasive maneuvers," she shouted. But it was too late. The alien ship moved with blinding speed, closing the distance between them in a matter of seconds. The view screen filled with red light as the ship's weapon systems powered up, the air around them crackling with energy. "Captain, we can't get out of here in time," Lee shouted. Ward knew she was right. The alien ship was too fast, too powerful. They were trapped. But just as the alien ship was about to fire, a new voice filled the bridge. A deep, resonant voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Enough!" The voice echoed through the ship, reverberating in Ward's bones. She felt a strange sensation, as if the very fabric of reality was shifting around them. The alien ship froze in place, its weapon systems powering down. The figure on its surface lowered its hand, its dark eyes narrowing as it turned its gaze toward the eclipse. "You are not of this world," the voice said, its tone cold and detached. "You do not belong here." Ward felt a chill run down her spine. The voice was not coming from the alien ship. It was coming from the planet itself. "Identify yourselves," the voice commanded. Ward swallowed hard, her mind racing as she tried to come up with a response. They were in uncharted territory, dealing with forces far beyond their understanding. But they had no choice. They had to respond. "This is Captain Serena Ward of the Starship Eclipse," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We come in peace. We mean no harm." The voice was silent for a moment, as if considering her words. Then it spoke again, its tone even colder than before. "You are intruders. You have trespassed in a place where you do not belong. Your presence here is a threat to the balance." Ward's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of the planet's gaze on her, a gaze that seemed to pierce through her very soul. We didn't mean to trespass," she said, her voice shaking. "We were investigating an anomaly. We had no idea." Silence. The voice cut her off, its tone final and unforgiving. "You have disrupted the balance. You have awakened forces that should not be disturbed. For this, you must be punished." Ward felt a wave of panic wash over her. They were trapped, helpless against a force they couldn't even begin to understand. "Wait," she shouted, desperation creeping into her voice. "Please, we didn't know. We're just trying to survive." The voice was silent for a long moment, and Ward could feel the tension in the air as the alien ship hovered above them, its weapons still trained on the eclipse. Finally, the voice spoke again, its tone slightly softer, though no less menacing. "Very well. You will be given a chance to prove your worth. But be warned, the path ahead is fraught with danger. You may not survive." Ward felt a flicker of hope, though it was quickly tempered by fear. They had been given a reprieve, but it was clear that they were far from safe. "What must we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The voice did not answer directly. Instead, the ground beneath the eclipse began to tremble, the red dust swirling into the air as a massive door opened in the earth below them. "You will enter the depths," the voice said, its tone ominous. "There, you will face the trials. If you succeed, you will be allowed to leave this place. If you fail," the voice trailed off, but Ward didn't need to hear the rest. The meaning was clear. "Prepare to descend," she ordered, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her. The eclipse slowly descended into the cavernous opening, the alien ship hovering above them like a silent sentinel. The darkness swallowed them whole, the light of the surface fading away until there was nothing left but the eerie glow of the ship's interior. As they descended deeper into the earth, Ward couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The air was thick with tension, and the ship's sensors were picking up strange readings. Unfamiliar energy signatures that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. "Captain, I'm getting some strange readings down here," Jax reported, his voice tense. "It's like the very walls of this place are alive." Ward's heart raced as she studied the data on her console. The energy readings were off the charts, unlike anything they had encountered before. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being twisted and warped by some unseen force. "Stay alert," she ordered. "We have no idea what we're walking into." The ship continued to descend, the walls of the cavern closing in around them. The darkness was oppressive, the air thick with a sense of impending doom. Finally, they reached the bottom, a vast, open chamber illuminated by a faint, otherworldly glow. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, symbols that seemed to pulse with a strange energy. In the center of the chamber stood a massive stone altar, its surface etched with the same symbols that adorned the walls. And on the altar lay a glowing orb, its light pulsating with an eerie, rhythmic beat. Ward felt a chill run down her spine as she approached the altar. The orb was beautiful, mesmerizing, but there was something sinister about it, something that sent a shiver of fear through her. "This is it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This is what we came for." But as she reached out to touch the orb, the voice returned, its tone filled with menace. "Choose wisely, Captain. The path you take will determine your fate." Ward hesitated, her hand hovering over the orb. She could feel its power, a raw, untamed force that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. But there was something else, something dark and malevolent, lurking just beneath the surface. She could feel its presence, a cold, suffocating weight that threatened to crush her. "We have no choice," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We have to see this through." With a deep breath, Ward reached out and grasped the orb. Chapter 3. The Trials. As soon as Captain Serena Ward touched the glowing orb, the chamber around them seemed to pulse with energy, the symbols on the walls flaring to life with a blinding light. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a low, ominous rumble filled the air. "What's happening?" Lee shouted, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of noise. Ward gripped the orb tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. The energy radiating from it was overwhelming, a raw force that seemed to resonate with the very core of her being. She could feel it pulling at her, drawing her deeper into its embrace. And then, with a sudden jolt, the world around them shifted. The chamber vanished, replaced by a vast, featureless expanse of darkness. Ward felt a wave of vertigo wash over her as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. There was no up or down, no sense of direction, just an endless void that stretched out in all directions. "Where are we?" Jax's voice was filled with fear, his usually steady demeanor shaken by the disorienting environment. Ward didn't have an answer. She could feel the orb in her hand, still pulsing with energy, but there was no sign of the chamber or the altar. It was as if they had been transported to another dimension, a place where the laws of physics no longer applied. And then, out of the darkness, a figure appeared that was humanoid, but its features were distorted, as if it was made of shadows rather than flesh. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its presence filled Ward with a deep, primal fear. "Welcome, intruders," the figure said, its voice echoing in the void. "You have entered the realm of the trials. Here, you will face the consequences of your actions." Ward's grip tightened on the orb, her mind racing as she tried to process the situation. The figure was clearly the source of the voice they had heard earlier, but what did it mean by trials? "What do you want from us?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The figure's eyes narrowed, its expression unreadable. "You have disrupted the balance. You have awakened forces that should not be disturbed. Now, you must prove your worth." Ward felt a chill run down her spine. This was it, the test they had been warned about. Whatever the trials were, they were not going to be easy. "What are these trials?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The figure gestured with one shadowy hand, and the darkness around them began to shift and change. Shapes emerged from the void, twisted, nightmarish forms that seemed to writhe and contort as they approached. "You will face your fears," the figure said, its voice cold and detached. "Your deepest, darkest fears. If you survive, you will be allowed to leave this place. If you fail," the figure didn't need to finish the sentence. The meaning was clear. Ward felt a surge of panic as the shapes drew closer. They were monstrous, grotesque creatures, their forms shifting and changing as they moved. Some were covered in sharp, spiked armor. Others oozed with a sickly, pulsating light. They were the stuff of nightmares, creatures born from the darkest corners of the human mind. "We need to get out of here," Jax muttered, his voice shaking. "We're not going to survive this." But Ward knew there was no escape. They had to face the trials, whatever they were, and they had to do it together. "Stay close," she ordered, her voice firm. "We'll get through this." The creatures closed in, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Ward could feel their presence, a suffocating weight that seemed to press down on her from all sides. They were hungry, desperate to feed on her fear, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She had faced fear before, and she had survived. She would survive this too. As the first creature lunged at her, Ward swung the orb with all her might, smashing it into the creature's head. The orb flared with a blinding light, and the creature shrieked in pain, its form dissolving into the void. But there were more, so many more. The creatures swarmed around them, their claws and fangs gleaming in the darkness. Ward fought with everything she had, swinging the orb like a weapon, but it was clear that they were outnumbered. "We can't keep this up," Lee shouted, her voice filled with desperation. Ward knew she was right. They were being overwhelmed, the creatures closing in from all sides. But even as the darkness threatened to consume them, she felt a surge of determination. They had come too far to give up now. They would survive. They had to. "Keep fighting," she shouted, her voice filled with resolve. "Don't let them win." The crew rallied around her, their fear replaced by a fierce determination. They fought with everything they had, swinging their weapons with a fury born of desperation. And then, just as it seemed like they were about to be overrun, the darkness began to recede. The creatures dissolved into the void, their forms unraveling as if they had never existed. Ward gasped for breath, her heart pounding in her chest. They had survived the first trial, but she knew there would be more. The figure reappeared, its eyes glowing with a cold light. "You have passed the first trial," it said, its voice devoid of emotion. "But there are many more to come. Prepare yourselves." Ward's grip on the orb tightened as the world around them shifted once more. The void gave way to a new environment, a dense, foggy forest filled with twisted trees and thorny vines. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground squelched beneath their feet. "This is only the beginning," the figure said, its voice echoing through the fog. "Your greatest challenges lie ahead. If you survive, you will be allowed to leave this place. But be warned, the further you go, the more dangerous the trials will become." Ward nodded, her mind focused on the task at hand. They had come too far to turn back now. Whatever the trials threw at them, they would face it together. "Stay close," she ordered, her voice steady. "We'll get through this." The crew moved forward, their weapons at the ready, as they ventured deeper into the foggy forest. The twisted trees loomed above them, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers as they walked. Ward couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The air was thick with tension, and she could feel eyes on them, eyes that seemed to follow their every move. "We're not alone," Lee whispered, her voice trembling. Ward nodded, her grip on the orb tightening. She could feel the presence of something dark and malevolent, lurking just beyond the edge of her vision. "We need to keep moving," she said, her voice firm. "Stay alert." But even as they pressed on, the feeling of unease grew stronger. The fog seemed to thicken around them, obscuring their vision and muffling their footsteps. The twisted trees closed in, their branches forming a labyrinth that seemed to have no end. And then, out of the fog, a figure appeared that was humanoid, but its features were twisted and deformed, its skin pale and sickly. Its eyes were hollow, and its mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin. "Welcome, intruders," the figure said, its voice dripping with malice. "You have entered the realm of the forest. Here, you will face the darkness within." Ward felt a chill run down her spine. The figure was not just a guardian of the trials. It was a manifestation of their fears, a twisted reflection of the darkness that lay within each of them. "We're not afraid of you," she said, her voice steady. The figure's grin widened, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. "Oh, but you are. You fear what you cannot see, what you cannot understand. You fear the darkness within yourselves." Ward's heart pounded in her chest as the figure stepped closer, its hollow eyes boring into her soul. "But you cannot escape the darkness," the figure continued, its voice a whisper. "It is a part of you, a part of all of you, and it will consume you." Ward felt a wave of terror wash over her, but she refused to let it take hold. She had faced darkness before, and she had survived. She would survive this too. "We'll see about that," she said, her voice filled with resolve. The figure's grin twisted into a snarl, and the forest around them seemed to come alive. The twisted trees reached out with their skeletal branches, their thorns gleaming in the dim light. "Run," the figure hissed. Ward didn't need to be told twice. She turned and ran, the crew following close behind. The forest closed in around them, the trees and vines forming a maze of twisted wood and thorns. But no matter how fast they ran, the figure was always just behind them, its hollow eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "You cannot escape," it whispered, its voice echoing in the darkness. "The darkness will consume you." Ward's breath came in ragged gasps as she pushed herself to keep going. The orb in her hand pulsed with energy, but it offered no comfort, only a reminder of the power that lay just out of reach. "We have to keep moving," she shouted, her voice filled with desperation. "We can't let it catch us." But no matter how fast they ran, the figure was always there, a shadowy presence that loomed over them like a specter of death. And then, just as Ward felt her strength begin to falter, they burst through the trees and into a clearing. The fog lifted, and the figure vanished, leaving them alone in the silence of the forest. Ward collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. They had survived the second trial, but she knew there were more to come. The figure reappeared, its eyes glowing with a cold light. "You have passed the second trial," it said, its voice devoid of emotion. "But the darkness is always with you. It will never leave you." Ward felt a shiver run down her spine, but she refused to let the fear take hold. They had come too far to give up now. They would survive the trials, no matter what it took. "Prepare yourselves," the figure said, its voice echoing through the clearing. "The final trial is upon you." The ground beneath them began to tremble, and the trees around them withered and died, their twisted branches crumbling to dust. The darkness returned, swallowing the clearing whole, and Ward felt a sense of dread settle over her like a shroud. This was it, the final trial, the test that would determine their fate. Ward tightened her grip on the orb, her mind focused on the task at hand. They would survive. They had to. Chapter 4. The final trial. As the darkness closed in around them, Captain Serena Ward felt a sense of unease settle in her chest. They had survived the first two trials, but this one felt different. The air was thick with tension, and the orb in her hand pulsed with a strange, rhythmic beat. "We have to stay together," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her. The crew gathered around her, their faces pale but determined. They had come too far to turn back now. They would face whatever lay ahead, no matter how terrifying. The ground beneath them began to shift and change, the darkness swirling around them like a living thing. Shapes emerged from the void, twisted, nightmarish forms that seemed to defy the very laws of reality. But these were not the creatures they had faced before. These were something else, something far more dangerous. "Stay alert," Ward ordered, her voice firm. The figures moved closer, their forms shifting and changing as they approached. They were humanoid, but their features were distorted, their bodies twisted and deformed. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and their mouths were twisted into grotesque grins. "You have come far," one of the figures said, its voice cold and detached. "But the final trial will test you in ways you cannot imagine." Ward felt a shiver run down her spine. The figures were not just guardians of the trials. They were manifestations of their deepest fears, twisted reflections of the darkness that lay within each of them. "We're not afraid of you," she said, her voice steady. The figure's grin widened, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. "Oh, but you are. You fear what you cannot see, what you cannot understand. You fear the darkness within yourselves." Ward's heart pounded in her chest as the figures closed in around them, their hollow eyes boring into her soul. And they would face it all together. The eclipse streaked through the stars, its crew united in purpose and determination. They had faced the darkness and survived, but the challenges ahead would be even greater. But Ward was ready. She had faced the trials and come out stronger for it. And she would continue to fight, no matter what the future held. The darkness would always be with them, but so would the light. And as long as they had each other, they could face anything. The journey home would be long, but they would make it. They had proven themselves in the trials, and they would continue to prove themselves in the days to come. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, and they would do it with courage, determination, and the knowledge that they were stronger for having faced the darkness. The eclipse flew on, its crew united and ready for whatever the future held. They had faced the trials and come out stronger for it. And they would continue to fight, no matter what the future held. For they had faced the darkness and survived. And they would continue to fight, no matter what the future held. The journey home would be long, but they were ready for it. They had faced the trials and come out stronger for it. And they would continue to fight, no matter what the future held. For they had faced the darkness and survived, and they would continue to fight, no matter what the future held. The journey home would be long, but they were ready for it. They had faced the trials and come out stronger for it. And they would continue to fight, no matter what the future held. For they had faced the darkness and survived, and they would continue to fight, no matter what the future held.